Because strength knows no gender. A woman is going to be, she's wearing the little plaid. It's limited edition, 8-roll package in Walmart. We looked for them today. I could not find them.
I'm against it.
Probably sold out. I know. So there you go. But I think
why do they have to take another guy's job?
The brawny woman. Because women pay more for dry cleaning. So we have something coming to us. But here's the best part, all right? So they're also going to showcase a series of short films on its website that highlight women.
Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Bret Baier. We will have an extended interview with House Speaker Paul Ryan in just a few minutes. First tonight, damage control in the continuing furor over Trump administration officials and contacts with representatives from Russia. And President Trump going on a Twitter offensive against the top two Democrats in Congress. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Right, good evening to you. The ongoing controversy surrounding Attorney General Jeff Sessions' contacts with the Russian ambassador completely derailed what had been a triumphant week for President Trump. And with White House staff struggling to try to find a way past it, the president today decided he was going to punch his way out.
Education is the civil rights issue of our time.
On his way to Florida to talk school choice, President Trump launched a Twitter war with the Senate Minority Leader over Russia. The first shot, a 13-year-old photo of Chuck Schumer sharing a donut with Vladimir Putin. The president writing, quote, "We should start an immediate investigation into Senator Schumer and his ties to Russia and Putin. A total hypocrite." Within minutes, Schumer fired back. Happily talk, Ari, my contact with Mr. Putin and his associates took place in 2003 in full view of press and public under oath. Would you and your team? Schumer and many of his Democratic colleagues are still calling for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to step down, even though Sessions yesterday announced he would recuse himself from any investigation regarding the Trump campaign. In Janesville, Wisconsin today, the vice president said Sessions isn't going anywhere.
The president and I have full confidence in the Attorney General. He is a man of integrity.
The Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, has had a number of contacts with Trump officials and part-time advisors. Sessions met with Kislyak twice last year, once in his Senate office, the other time among a group of people at a conference during the Republican convention. Jared Kushner and Lieutenant General Michael Flynn met with Kislyak at Trump Tower in December, while Flynn also spoke with him by telephone. Trump campaign advisors Carter Page and J.D. Gordon had casual encounters with Kislyak at the same July conference where Sessions met him briefly. Gordon told Fox News they spent a few minutes talking about the need for better cooperation between the U.S. and Russia in the fight against terrorism. Democrats have had plenty of contact with Kislyak, too. He joined a number of them, including Congressman Bobby Rush and James Clyburn, and Senators Tammy Baldwin and Catherine Cortez Masto at the president's Tuesday speech to Congress. This afternoon, the president contradicted Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi's claim to have never met Kislyak, tweeting a photo of the ambassador just 2 seats away from Russian President Medvedev at this 2010 meeting with Pelosi. The president wrote, quote, "I hereby demand a second investigation after Schumer of Pelosi for her close ties to Russia and lying about it." The president blames Democrats for the Russia flap, insisting they're trying to save face after losing the election, calling the whole issue, quote, "a total witch hunt." Welcome or not, on that point, the president found support today from the Russian foreign minister.
I can only refer to a quote that was circulated today in the mass media. This strongly resembles a witch hunt or the times of McCarthyism.
Sergei Kislyak, who seems to be just about everywhere in Washington, was also a frequent figure here at the White House during the Obama administration. The logs show he visited the White House a total of 22 times when Barack Obama was president, including 4 times last year alone. Brett?
On this with Speaker Ryan in just a moment. John, thank you. Congress is not in session today, but there is plenty of speculation about what Republicans are planning for Obamacare, repeal and replace. We'll talk with Speaker Ryan about that as well in just a moment. But first, what is happening today on Capitol Hill? Here's Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel.
We expect in a matter of days you're going to begin to see a very brisk pace of legislative activity. Look, we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare. We're going to do it at the same time.
In House Speaker Paul Ryan's hometown of Janesville, Wisconsin, Vice President Mike Pence said a better health care system is on the way. Key lawmakers are expected to work through the weekend, fine-tuning the Republican repeal and replacement of Obamacare. The Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce panels are likely to vote on the measure next week, with the goal of a vote on the House floor by the end of the month. Speaker Ryan insists the contents will be quite familiar when the bill is made public.
Much of it was modeled off the Tom Price legislation, which we as conservatives have always seen as sort of the gold standard for replacing Obamacare. He's now the Secretary of HHS. That is the bill, the plan that we ran on in 2016.
Yet Democrats are mocking Ryan and the Republicans for campaigning on repealing and replacing Obamacare since 2010, and the plan has not been unveiled. Democratic Whip Steny Hoyer confronted Republican Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy yesterday, asking to see the GOP proposal.
Can I see the bill today?
You're not on that committee, so you can look at when they mark it up.
In other words, they will mark it up before anybody in the public, including a member of the House of Representatives, before
the gentleman yields, I'll answer his question.
Is that what the gentleman is telling me?
They will post it before they mark it up so everybody can see it and debate it.
To make sure there isn't a sharp drop-off in coverage, Republican leaders say they must offer tax credits. They argue tax deductions only work for upper-income Americans. Some conservatives have pushed back hard on that idea, complaining that would be a new entitlement.
So that's no different than what you get with Obamacare, which is a subsidy. So Obama called it a subsidy. Paul Ryan and some Republicans are calling it a refundable tax credit. It's the same thing.
GOP leaders note virtually every promise that was made in selling Obamacare has been broken, and they say soon they will deliver for the American people. Brett?
Thanks, Mike. Now a Fox News exclusive. We go in depth on all the big issues with House Speaker Paul Ryan. He joins us from Janesville, Wisconsin. Mr. Speaker, thanks for being here.
Hey, good to be with you, Brett. Nice to be with you.
I want to start with, we want to talk about health care, which is why you were out there in Wisconsin, and spend some time on that. But I want to start with the news of the day, the continued fallout from Attorney General Sessions' recusal yesterday and this Russia investigation. I know what you said about it. Yesterday at a press conference, you said this when asked about recusing.
If he himself is the subject of an investigation, of course he would. But if he's not, I don't see any purpose or reason to doing this.
Okay, so a couple hours after that, he did it. What do you think happened?
Well, I think what he did was he listened to advice of people within the Justice Department on how best to maintain the integrity and the independence of the Justice Department. And so I think I don't think he had to do this, but I think he did what he thought was in the best interest of the Justice Department, which I think is fine. He was a surrogate for the campaign. And so I think he just wanted to err on the side of caution and remove any shred of doubt or concern whatsoever by doing that. So I think he kind of went above and beyond, and I think he should be touted for doing that.
And I've heard you talk about the investigation so far, that you have not seen any evidence of collusion or cooperation or communication beyond what we know now. How many members of Congress do you think have interacted with the Russian ambassador or with their other diplomats over the last several years?
Oh, gosh. I would think dozens, if not more, the hundreds. That's very common. We meet with ambassadors constantly as members of Congress. That's their job, is to come and meet with members of Congress and express their interests, their concerns, especially with people on foreign policy committees like Armed Services Committee or the Foreign Relations Committee. I host an annual reception for the entire diplomatic corps as Speaker of the House every year, and you have dozens of ambassadors coming to the Capitol for just a welcome reception. So it's a very, very, very common thing for members of Congress to interact with ambassadors of other countries.
Understanding that these investigations are going forward and you're going to let them play out, at some point are you going to speak up if there's not there and say we need to move on from this?
No, I think that's right, but they did meddle with our election. That's something we know. And by the way, we know this because of investigations that we in Congress or our intelligence committees and the intelligence community themselves discovered. So that's why we think we want to get to the bottom of what Russia is up to. That's a problem. And Russia not only try to meddle with our election, but they're doing this all around the world. They do this in Europe, obviously Ukraine. So I think there's an interest to make sure that we can find out exactly what is Russia up to and all that they've been doing. But yes, you're right. If this is just more of a fishing expedition, we're not interested in continuing to do a fishing expedition. But having said that, you know, Congress is always doing oversight. This is our job. And the committee in the House, like the committee in the Senate, has a scope that they've agreed to between Republicans and Democrats on how to go forward with this investigation to make sure that no stone is unturned, to make sure that we get to the bottom of things. And as of yet, we've never been presented with any evidence whatsoever that anybody in the Trump campaign or an American official was involved with the Russians on any of this.
Are you concerned on the flip side that the Obama administration may have been surveilling members of the Trump campaign in a pretty detailed investigation during the election?
Well, I don't think that's the case. If you recall, President Obama asked the intelligence community after the election to canvass all the intelligence and give a report to Congress on what Russia did do and all their interactions. And in that report, nobody alleged that there was a person in America, like a Trump campaign official, involved with the Russians on this. So if they would have found that, you think they would have put that in the report that they gave us in early January?
Right, but there's a report that June 2016, there's a FISA request by the Obama administration, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, to monitor communications involving Donald Trump and several other campaign officials. Then they get turned down, and then in October they renew it, and they do start a wiretap at Trump Tower with some computer and Russian banks, and it doesn't show up anything by reporting. Have you heard that?
Well, again, and like I said, none of us in Congress or anybody that I know in Congress has been presented with evidence to the contrary of what you just said.
So you believe it to be true?
Yeah, that we have seen no evidence that anybody in this campaign or any other American was in on it with the Russians to meddle in our elections. We know they meddled. Russia is an adversary, and that's something we have to work to counteract.
I got it. But my point is that the Obama administration was pretty aggressive. I have a couple of FISA requests.
No, I hear your point. But I'm saying, but I've seen nothing of that. I've seen nothing come of that. That's my point.
Okay. Let's turn to Obamacare. You're out there in Janesville making this pitch, kind of doing the messaging. When is the rollout? Will you roll it out next week?
Yeah, well, I'll let the committees of jurisdiction make the announcement on that. But our committees that write these bills, working very, very closely with the administration, are fine-tuning the legislation. That's what you do when you're near the end of a drafting of a big piece of legislation like this. They're going through the fine-tuning of the legislation. So the Commerce Committee and the Ways and Means Committee are the two key committees in the House. They're running point on this in the House. They're working with their counterparts in the Senate and in the White House. When they're done with their fine-tuning, they'll make that announcement, and then they'll tell us when they're ready to go and move on the legislation. So they'll make that announcement pretty soon, I think.
What do you say to the critics who say you're just doing what Democrats used to do, and that's cramming legislation down the throats in kind of the dark of night, not in a transparent way?
Are you kidding me, Brett? Give me a break.
I'm just telling
Seriously.
you what they say.
No, I know. Okay, let's just review what we've been doing. Last year, in early 2016, we rolled out an Obamacare repeal and replace plan. We called it A Better Way. Go on the internet and read it. We ran on that plan. That plan resembled Tom Price's legislation that so many people in Congress were co-sponsors of. Then after the election came and we won the election, we started putting that plan into legislative text, having hearings. All these hearings on repealing and replacing Obamacare were in the congressional committee. So we've been doing hearings all year long. Now we're translating the findings of those hearings, that plan, into legislative text. That's the fine-tuning of the drafting that's occurring. And then guess what? This bill's not being written in my office like it was in Harry Reid's office on Christmas Eve in 2009. This bill is being written by the committees that are in charge of health care, which is the regular order process. This bill will go through the committee process, go through the Budget Committee, then go to the floor of Congress under what we call regular order. Right. That is precisely the most transparent and normal way of doing business, which is the opposite of what the Democrats did when they crammed Obamacare through.
All right, well, here is not a liberal Democrat, a Republican senator who says he's trying to get the details.
Wait, let me guess. You're going to quote Rand Paul for a second here. Yeah, right.
Hold on.
Yeah.
What we think is being hidden from conservatives is that there's a lot of Obamacare light
There's a new entitlement program that will increase at about 5% a year forever. There is also a Cadillac tax, or something similar to the Cadillac tax that was in Obamacare. And there's also an individual mandate, believe it or not. Instead of paying the mandate to the government, they're going to tell you have to pay the mandate by law to an insurance company. So a lot of conservatives will be upset to know that we're keeping those things from Obamacare, and there needs to be an open debate about it. Is that all true?
No, it's not, and I think he's just kind of, I like Rand, but I think he's looking for a publicity stunt here. What's happening is the committees of jurisdiction are drafting legislation and getting feedback from their members. That's exactly how legislation is supposed to be written. The things he described are just not accurate. And like I said, when the committees write their bills and put their bills out there to mark up, everybody will see what they've done.
Right, but are you worried that if on the tax side or the fight on the Medicaid side, that you only have 21 votes to lose and you only have one shot at this with reconciliation? You only have one shot at the apple.
I'm not really worried at all, because we're doing this hand in glove with President Trump, with Tom Price, HHS Secretary, with our counterparts in the Senate. We're all working off the same piece of paper, the same legislation. So let me just describe in general what we're talking about here. We're talking about giving the states control of the Medicaid program, which is something that conservatives have been fighting for years. I wrote our budgets. We used to call them the Roadmap for America, then the Path to Prosperity. Every one of my budgets that I wrote as the conservative gold standard for Republicans was to give states control of Medicaid. And then on the tax front, we've long been saying we need to equalize the tax treatment of health care for everybody in America. Right now, the tax code discriminates against people who do not get health care from their jobs. There's a huge tax benefit if you get health care at work. If you've got to go buy your health insurance, there's no tax benefit for you. So what conservatives have long said is let's equalize the tax treatment for health care so that it doesn't matter whether you get health care at work or not at work, let's give you the same kind of tax benefit so that you can go buy what you want to buy. You go into a free market as a consumer and buy the plan of your choosing with the health savings accounts as well. This is what we have long stood on as conservatives. It is the plan that we ran on in all of 2016 that we said if we get the chance of having a Republican president, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate, we're going to repeal and replace Obamacare, and this is what we're going to replace it with. Well, guess what? We are keeping that promise, and that is exactly what we're doing here.
But you're also saying it's going to be a fight over the next few weeks.
It's going to be a fight. It's going to be a fight with people who want Obamacare. We got a choice to make. Do we want to keep Obamacare, or do we want to repeal and replace Obamacare? The president has been extremely clear that we're going to repeal and replace it with a better system that gives people choice and competition that's not run by government.
Obamacare
where people have freedom. I think that's a publicity stunt as far as I'm concerned.
All right. More with Speaker Ryan on a couple of other issues coming up after a short break. We continue now with our exclusive interview with House Speaker Paul Ryan, joining us from his hometown, Janesville, Wisconsin. Mr. Speaker, what about tax reform? Is that, we know Obamacare is going to roll out likely next week and in coming days. What about tax reform? When does that all kind of come to fruition?
Yeah, well, as we've long been planning, tax reform is part of our spring budget. As you know, Brett, you can do one reconciliation bill at a time. What that means to your viewers who aren't into sort of congressional verbiage here is in a budget bill, that can't be filibustered. And so there are two major projects we're trying to achieve this year, just in the first 200 days of this Trump administration, that we think is enormous progress for the American people. Number one, repeal and replace Obamacare. We know Democrats aren't going to do that. So we have to use a budget bill, which is called reconciliation, to pass that so that that can't be filibustered. And then number two, after this first Obamacare bill that repeals and replaces Obamacare is passed, then we move to another budget. That's our spring budget. And in that budget, we will do tax reform because, again, I don't think Democrats are going to want to work with the Republicans to lower taxes, to cut taxes for families, for small businesses, for all kinds of businesses, to expand economic growth. They believe in more Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren economics, and I don't think they're going to want to work with us on reducing tax rates for the American people, for the American workers. And so that's going to take a budget as well. But you have to do one budget first and then a second budget. You can't do two budgets simultaneously according to our budget rules.
As a part of tax reform, you support a border border adjustment tax. Wouldn't the largest employees take a hit here? Wouldn't that cost them jobs and possibly pass on that money to the consumer, which kind of takes away some of the money that you're giving tax breaks to?
Yeah, actually, we just don't see it that way. Most economists will tell you that the currency adjusts when border adjustments occur. Here's the point. This isn't a new idea. This is actually the idea that 160 countries have. 160 countries already border adjust their taxes. America does not, with countries like North Korea, Iran, Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan. Basically, all other countries and normal industrialized countries border adjust their taxes, 160 of them. And here's what they do. They don't tax their exports and they tax their imports. We do the opposite. So here's what we do. If we make something in America, we tax it. If it goes overseas, we tax it, and then it's taxed as it goes in another country. When other countries make something, they take the tax off of it, and as it enters our country, because we don't border adjust, we don't tax it. And so what happens is we have a tax on American-made goods and services. So all we're saying is let's just level the playing field. Let's just be equal. Let's make sure that foreign imports are taxed at the same level, the same way American-made products are, because today they're not.
From these places like Walmart and other businesses, and they say this is not a good thing for the country. Also, you hear the arguments, I think, from Republicans, not only in your own caucus, but Senate Republicans, and this is going to be a real battle. Is it necessary to be able to make the numbers add up without blowing up the deficit or the debt?
It is. So as per your earlier point, we're going to do this with the Republican votes to avoid filibusters. That way we have to do it through a budget. And the rules of a budget, the rules of what we call reconciliation, is it has to be revenue neutral. So $1 trillion basically gets us a 10-point drop in our tax rates on American businesses to make American businesses more competitive. We have the highest tax rates in the industrialized world. Corporate tax rates are 35%. The top tax rate on successful small businesses is 44.6%. The average tax rate on businesses in the industrialized world, 23%. So we're really losing here. We're really losing jobs and economic growth. American companies are going overseas. We've got to stop that. And this does raise $1 trillion from overseas, not from American businesses, to lower our tax rates. That's really important. If we don't do this, then we have to get that kind of revenue from within the American economic system, from within our corporate tax base. So the trade-off is really also kind of ugly. To the Walmart point, and I understand there's a lot of concern about this, we want to make sure that this is done in such a way with the kinds of transition rules so that we ease into a new kind of a system, so we stop taxing American exports, and we have a currency adjustment that's gradual so that no consumer sees any change in their prices. This bill, according to the Tax Foundation, 1.7 million new jobs, higher wages, almost 10% additional economic growth. This is about jobs. It's about American competitiveness. It's about not hollowing out American manufacturing and getting people to bring their companies back to America, bring manufacturing back to America, and that's healthy for our economy. That's why we're talking about these things.
Mr. Speaker, two quick things. One is, in order not to blow up the deficit and debt, you're going to have to do something else, right? I mean, you're going to have to talk about long-term entitlement reform, even though the president doesn't talk about it like that now. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, but I wouldn't say he's not talking about it. You got to remember, Obamacare, it's an entitlement as well. No, Obamacare, repealing and replacing, is entitlement reform.
You know what we're saying here.
Getting Medicaid back to the states and repealing Obamacare is an enormous step in the right direction toward reforming entitlements. There are other entitlements that have to be dealt with, no two ways about it, and that's a conversation we're just going to have to keep on having.
And the last thing, why is it that Nancy Pelosi and then Harry Reid were able to keep Democrats much more in line on voting on big things than Republicans? It seems like as we're adding up heads and talking to people up on the Hill, there's a lot of disparity, a lot of pushback about from the Republican caucus.
The way I look at that, Brett, is Republicans are just much more individualistic. We're individualists, generally speaking, but at the end of the day, President Trump made it really clear at this great, fantastic speech he gave on Tuesday, which is we've got big things to do. We've got to do it. We're going to unify to do this. Either you want to repeal and replace Obamacare or you don't. I think Republicans are going to say yes to that in Congress. Either you want to reform this awful tax code or you don't. I think Republicans are going to say yes to that. I think we either want to rebuild our military or you don't. I think Republicans are going to say yes to that. So I think we're going to have negotiations, obviously, out front in public on TV about how we want to achieve these shared conservative goals. But at the end of the day, when we make decisions that this is the consensus among Republicans, this is what the direction the president wants to head, we're going to unify and get things done, and that's what I'm confident about.
Mr. Speaker, we appreciate your time today.
You bet. Take care, Brett.
Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen is hinting the Fed may resume raising interest rates later this month. Yellen told an audience in Chicago the board expects steady economic improvement to justify additional increases. The Fed's next meeting begins March 14th. Stocks were up slightly today. The Dow gained 3. The S&P 500 finished ahead 1. The Nasdaq was up 9.5. And for the week, the Dow climbed about 0.9 of a percentage point. The S&P 500 was up 2/3. The Nasdaq gained about 0.4. Authorities in Missouri have arrested a man in connection with threats made to Jewish community centers nationwide and the Anti-Defamation League's headquarters in New York. The suspect's motivation may not be what you would think. Correspondent Laura Engel explains from New York.
FBI officials raided a St. Louis, Missouri home connected to Juan Thompson, the man accused of bomb threats against the Anti-Defamation League and some Jewish community centers around the country. Investigators say the 31-year-old was attempting to frame an ex-girlfriend who had broken up with him. Thompson is a former journalist fired from The Intercept after the online publication said he fabricated quotes and invented sources. He has been charged with 1 count of cyber-stalking, which could land him in jail for up to 5 years. The criminal complaint states Thompson allegedly made 8 threatening calls to JCCs in his name or the name of his ex-lover, including defamatory emails and faxes to his ex's employer, alleging she had made anti-Semitic statements on social media.
While the motive is unclear, the impact is crystal clear. Threatening Jewish institutions is an anti-Semitic act.
Leaders are applauding the Justice Department's fast work.
I am confident, as we evidence in today's arrest in Missouri, that we will find and we will prosecute those who have committed these acts of hatred.
The wave of threats prompted the evacuations of close to hundreds of JCCs and synagogues across the nation since January. Meantime, a Jewish cemetery in Rochester, New York, is the latest target in a wave of graveside attacks in recent weeks. At least a dozen headstones were desecrated, similar to what happened in Philadelphia and St. Louis. And the ADL proposing a plan of action, which includes creating a federal multi-agency task force on combating hate crimes. Brett?
Laura, thank you. State attorneys general are taking the Trump administration to court. And that's perfectly fine with the president and other Republicans. It turns out there is a method to the apparent meanness. Correspondent Doug McKelway tells us what it is.
Some great people back here.
A cheerful President Trump posing with Republican attorneys general on Tuesday, many of whom, ironically, are suing his administration. Why?
Sometimes it turns out the best way to help President Trump fulfill his campaign pledges to bring relief to the American people is to sue President Trump.
Their intention? To block federal regulations. In Missouri, this legal tactic centers on an endangered prehistoric fish that has outlived the dinosaurs, the pallid sturgeon. It reproduces in river shallows, which have become fewer. To resurrect the fish population, an Obama-era amendment to the Endangered Species Act allows the government to designate areas as critical where the fish hasn't even been observed. The amendment's implementation, the Fish and Wildlife Service acknowledges, is, quote, one of the most controversial and confusing aspects of the act.
And this is the key point, even if there is no endangered species on the land. And for Missouri, we're an agricultural state. That would mean that farmers and ranchers could find themselves unable to farm their land, unable to develop their land. Absolutely a killer for small businesses and small farms in our state.
Missouri's Hawley is one of 18 Republican AGs suing to overturn the rule. But they're combining forces in other ways, too, to challenge the Obama-era Waters of the United States plan, as well as overtime rules and the Clean Power Plan, which hurt the coal industry.
In West Virginia, we suffered acutely because thousands upon thousands of people were put out of work. A number of those people left the state or are pursuing other employment.
The strategy is not unique to Republican AGs. Democratic attorneys general are mobilizing in the same way, trying to preserve Obama-era climate change regulations, and most recently targeting President Trump's travel ban. That multi-state attack worked when Washington State's AG, Bob Ferguson, got a federal judge to temporarily block the travel ban nationwide.
We are a nation of laws. And as I've said, as we have said, from day one, that those laws apply to everybody in our country. And that includes the President of the United States.
Republican attorneys general note there is an added benefit to this legal tactic. The lawsuits are helping to restore the concept of federalism, empowering the states and restoring the balance of power against the executive branch. Brett?
Doug, thank you. The Speaker of the House on all the big topics. We'll get reaction to my interview with Speaker Paul Ryan when the panel joins me after a quick break.
Professional, non-political staffers with me, and we discussed some important international issues. Ambassadors were coming by to see me pretty often.
I think it's a big deal when you ask someone like the Attorney General to step down, but I found his explanation simply not credible. You don't, I think, treat a visit in your office by the Russian ambassador as something casual, something not memorable.
I don't think he had to do this, but I think he did what he thought was in the best interest of the Justice Department, which I think is fine. He was a surrogate for the campaign, and so I think he just wanted to err on the side of caution and remove any shred of doubt or concern whatsoever by doing that. So I think he kind of went above and beyond, and I think he should be...
Attorney General Sessions recusing himself from any future investigations in this regard. The president weighing in today on Twitter. He said we should start an immediate investigation into Senator Schumer and his ties to Russia and Putin, a total hypocrite, showing a picture there of Schumer and Putin. Then he says, I hereby demand a second investigation after Schumer of Pelosi for her close ties to Russia and lying about it. Nancy Pelosi saying she never met with the Russian ambassador, and there he is at a table right across the table from the minority leader. Chuck Schumer responding, happy to talk regarding my contact with Mr. Putin and his associates took place in 2003 in full view of press and public. Under oath, would you and your team, ? That's the back and forth on that today. We have a lot to cover here in that Paul Ryan interview. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior editor. No, he's not senior editor. He is editor-in-chief of the Weekly Standard. Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times. David Catanese, senior politics writer for U.S. News and World Report, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, first let's just quickly deal with the Russia stuff and the developments. Is there a sense that this is moving one way or another, going somewhere?
I mean, it is absolutely fascinating to watch this unfold. On the one hand, I think there are real questions about the Trump campaigns or Trump world's handling of some of these questions. They haven't been as straightforward as they ought to have been in a number of different cases, including Donald Trump himself. On the other hand, could Democrats have played this any worse, immediately calling for resignations, immediately sort of jumping to conclusions for which we don't yet have evidence? I think Trump world should have to answer these questions, but Democrats are going to push and push and push in a way that makes any inquiries they make less credible.
David?
Sessions at worst lied before Congress, though, about communications. At best, he misremembered. That's what gave this story extra fire.
And didn't clean it up afterwards.
And didn't really clean it up. And it's hard for me, given that he knew Russia was going to be at the center, it's been at the center of the Trump administration since this election occurred, that he didn't know he was going to get that question and wasn't prepared for it. Maybe he misremembered it, but man, he gave the Democrats some firepower on this by not saying, yes, I did have a meeting, and that's perfectly normal. He could have said that. He didn't.
Mercedes, what about this other part of the story that is so fascinating, the lengths that the Obama administration went to? A June FISA request, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, gets shot down. The judge says no go to monitoring Trump Tower. They go back at it in October, and they do get a FISA request granted. There is wiretapping going on and monitoring of a computer that has some ties, they believe, to a Russian bank. by all accounts, they don't come up with anything in this investigation, but the investigation continues, and we don't know if it ever stopped.
Right, and it was supposed to be, let's focus on whether Russia is meddling in our elections. But it almost has a feel to it that it goes beyond. What are the connections between the Trump campaign and these Russian officials? And there is this continual sense, I think you're feeling, of the deep state, which is what they keep calling, of these intelligence insiders basically supporting, backing up President Obama, wanting to undermine President Trump's his presidency, and that is of a big concern. And this is why you're seeing these leaks coming out from these intelligence officials, and it's very troubling.
So listen, in the final weeks of his administration, here is a president who tried to narrow the scope of the NSA in the wake of Edward Snowden. But in the final weeks of his administration, he expands the NSA and the sharing with all of the intelligence agencies, and people are speculating that's because to get it out.
I don't think there's any question the president was intent, the former president, was intent on leaving behind landmines. And you're right, the NSA stuff is curious. Normally when NSA is listening in on a foreigner, they take great care to redact any American involved. The NSA is not supposed to spy on Americans. Here it was the reverse, and there was an obvious attempt, as reported in the New York Times, to make sure this was spread as widely as possible, that it would become a problem for the Trump administration. I wouldn't call it the deep state. It gives it a le Carre feel that there's this ominous enemy of the United States hidden in the bureaucracy. What this is the revenge of the losers. These are people who wanted to make trouble for an administration of a guy who they thought wasn't going to win and shouldn't have won, and to see what happens. And that's what I think is going on. To some extent, it's happened in other administrations, but I think it's more obvious, and we're going to get to the bottom of it, because there's going to be a lot of investigations.
All right, down the road, does an independent counsel happen?
Yeah, unless there's another shoe dropping, no.
I don't think so.
No, I agree with that.
No.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
All right, Obamacare. Let's listen to Speaker Ryan on the rollout of Obamacare repeal and replace.
The Commerce Committee and the Ways and Means Committee are the two key committees in the House. They're running points on this in the House. They're working with their counterparts in the Senate and in the White House. When they're done with their fine-tuning, they'll make that announcement, and then they'll tell us when they're ready to go and move on the legislation. So they'll make that announcement pretty soon, I think. So what conservatives have long said is let's equalize the tax treatment for health care so that it doesn't matter whether you get health care at work or not at work, let's give you the same kind of tax benefit so that you can go buy what you want to buy. You go into a free market as a consumer and buy the plan of your choosing with the health savings accounts as well.
I'm told from our people up on Capitol Hill it's going to roll out on Monday and then start this rollout through next week. And he didn't like the question about transparency at all. I was quoting Republicans, but he really kind of pushed back on that.
I was shocked that he was that confident to your question about, hey, are you sure you're not going to lose 21 Republicans in the House? Look, the House Freedom Caucus members are sort of up in arms and on the Rand Paul, Ted Cruz side of this. Paul Ryan is dealing with the choice part of health care, but what the Rand Paul, Ted Cruz folks say is you're not dealing with the cost. You're using subsidies as a replacement. It's still taxpayer money. You're still creating an entitlement, and that is going to be the hurdle I think Paul Ryan has to get over with
the
conservatives.
choice that they're saying is it's not Obamacare light, he's saying, but it is going to be either you choose to repeal and replace, or you're stuck with what we got.
Right. I think that's the way that Paul Ryan wants to frame it. What was so interesting for me in listening to that exchange, particularly the exchange about transparency, is this has long been something that Paul Ryan has argued. He's right when he says that he prefers to have the committees of jurisdiction take these issues and push them from the bottom up rather than the top down.
And I think they will.
I think he's right about that. I think actually Rand Paul and his other critics are wrong about that. I mean, this is something that I criticized Paul Ryan for when he first became Speaker on the issue of tax reform. I thought Republicans from leadership on down should have pushed a tax reform package, and he pushed back at me and said, no. This all has to come from bottom up. That's the way he has played his speakership. It's consistent with what he's doing right now.
Mercedes?
Which it's so different from what we saw back with Obamacare in the first place, which was Harry Reid pushing this bill for 6 days of debate during the Christmas deadline. I think what you're seeing within the Republicans right now is this division into two camps, where you have Trump, Ryan, McConnell together, deadlock, lockstep, and then you have obviously Ryan and the Freedom Caucus, Paul, Cruz, Lee, and the Freedom Caucus that are saying we got to do this 2015 full repeal and nothing else. And that, I think, is going to be the sticking point. If they lose those Republicans in the Senate, those 3 Republicans, they can't push this through. They'll have to.
The biggest question is, how do you keep these insurance companies in the fold? Because they're all going to bolt this year because they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars.
It's going to have to be taxpayer money. And as for the Freedom Caucus, it's the Harikiri Caucus. Obamacare created an entitlement. It brought in about 20 million people. You cannot cut it off and expect that you're not going to have a revolt from sea to shining sea. They have to have some substitute. I think the way to do it is with a tax credit, but the idea that you can do a pure a revision of that, an abolition of that overnight is insane, and the whole Obamacare opposition would collapse. They need to be realistic and listen to Paul Ryan.
Next up, the Friday Lightning Round. At the White House earlier this week, the state attorneys general met, and they are playing a crucial role. We're back for the Friday Lightning Round. Unbeknownst to us, our own pundit here, Dr. Charles Krauthammer, wrote a column. Then we had a piece already in the pipeline, and in this column, he says, the revolt of the attorneys general is to be celebrated. It is a reassuring sign of the creativity and suppleness of the American Constitution, of its amphibian capacity to grow a new limb when an old one atrophies. Basically, Charles, the state attorneys general are suing the Trump administration in order for them to speed up the happenings of getting rid of some of these regulations.
And it's a continuation of these same attorneys general suing the Obama administration when it overstepped the boundaries of the presidency in egregious ways and succeeding, stopping him on immigration, stopping him on some regulations by EPA, which were equally egregious, and even stopping the forced expansion of Medicaid. Democratic AGs are going to pick it up and do the same thing in the Trump era. But what impressed me is the fact that Congress, which in the old days, in the 50s, would never have stood for these presidential encroachments, has become extremely atrophied, is the word I use there, has not resisted. Democrats allowed Obama to do anything he wanted at their own expense, institutional expense. And the AGs have now shown up and said, well, if they won't stop the president, we will, the states will, and it's working.
The cabinet nominees and where that stands, Donald Trump tweeting today, it is so pathetic that the Dems have still not approved my full cabinet. Well, they have moved, Dave, all the cabinet members that are waiting. There are hearings. Dan Coates still waiting a confirmation vote. He's Director of National Intelligence. Hearings not yet scheduled. The Trade Representative, Sonny Perdue, the Agriculture Secretary, and also Alexander Acosta, the Labor Secretary. But so far they've moved.
They got most of them through. And they got Carson and Perry this week. It has taken longer, and that's because of mostly because of Democrats stalling. I mean, McConnell wanted to sort of push them all through together. Democrats didn't want that, and they wanted some scalps. They got one scalp. The most important of those remaining is obviously intelligence. Frankly, most of these cabinet members, the most we're going to talk about of them was January and February. For the next 3 years, we'll never talk about them again besides Secretary of State, Defense, and National Security.
The important thing is that there's also below, and all the seats that have to be filled below those people.
Right, and so you have 552 of these executive positions that have to be Senate confirmed. Only 18 have been confirmed. 17 have been nominated. So you have two issues happening. One is that the Democrats are boycotting some of these committee hearings. So we see that with the case of Seema Verma, who is nominated for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. But then you also have the bottleneck in the White House personnel, which is that they still need to nominate 517 of these individuals. So you're having these two dynamics happening right now.
Steve.
Well, my colleague Chris Deaton at the Weekly Standard has a fascinating article up right now about the difference between Donald Trump's votes, yay votes for his nominees, and the historical norm. And if you look, Trump is averaging just 69 yay votes per nominee because of such heavy Democratic opposition. When you look at President Obama, for instance, it was almost 92 yay votes per nominee. So for all of the talk that Republicans were so opposed to President Obama and blocked him at every turn, what you're really seeing is dramatic opposition from Democrats in lockstep on Donald Trump.
Finally, Donald Trump, the president, today in Florida talking school choice.
Reverend King hoped that inferior education would become, as he said, quote, a thing of the past. And we're going to work very much for the future and what he predicted would be the future. Education is the civil rights issue of our time. And it's why I've asked Congress to support a school choice bill.
Traveling there with the Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos. Charles, is it possible that he can take this issue, he's dealing with a lot of issues, but this issue and really hammer it home about school choice?
I think he will, and I think he'll succeed. One of the great scandals of our time is the way that the Democrats, who are subservient to the teachers' unions, have allowed that union monopoly to essentially destroy the education of tens of thousands of young Americans, particularly in the inner cities, by not allowing them what ordinary middle-class people have, which is choice. I think it's a winning issue, and I think there's finally a chance with control of the branches of the executive and the legislature to get it done.
It's about bandwidth, though. We've got Obamacare repeal, tax reform. He's already laid out $1 trillion in infrastructure. Can education reform get done this year? I would be highly skeptical. Highly skeptical.
But he's got 4 years.
He's got 4 years, but the political capital is now, and I think he's got to focus. I mean, that was a great photo up today. But what does he want to get done within 100 days, within 200 days? That's scattered right now, and I think it's frustrating. You put too many initiatives out there and don't get anything done, you're left with nothing.
How do you argue against choice?
Okay.
I'm not arguing against the
winners and losers for the week.